First I pray, gracious and merciful God, open our ears and our minds and our hearts to the word you have for each of us this day. And as I, your servant, stand before you, I pray that I would decrease, that you would increase. And may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable and pleasing to you, O God, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. From noon on, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. And about 3 o'clock, Jesus cried with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? At that moment when Jesus hung upon the cross and was about to give up his last breath, he felt complete abandonment. He's not saying anything new. From the beginning of time, as the scriptures have recorded, people have felt moments in their lives when they were abandoned by God, forsaken even. For what is it to be forsaken? It's to be left. It's to be forgotten. It's to be ignored. It makes us think about desolate, deserted places. Places like this, our picnic woods here at Grace. As Jesus is calling out to his God, to his Father, he's saying the words of Psalm 22, why have you forsaken me? In Lamentations, Jeremiah chronicled the words of the Israelites as he said, why have you forgotten us completely? Why have you forgotten us these many days? It's this feeling that Jesus and all of God's people have always shared. Where are all those disciples that had followed him? Where are all those people who had left behind their lives to go wherever Jesus went? Where are all of those who said they would go with him even to death? Because right now, as Jesus is hanging on the cross, as he is nearing the very end of his life, there are only a few bystanders around, people here and there, talking about what's going on, waiting to see if God's going to do something miraculous at that moment. But what we know is that even though Jesus was there, crucified, waiting, giving up his last, he was not alone. It's just like these picnic woods. We look around and we remember what they once were, but reality is they're not forgotten. Our high-impact youth group actually uses this to play games and gather around fire and tell stories and connect with one another. And we think about ways to resurrect this space. It may seem forsaken, but the truth is God is always working in God's people to bring about something new. And even though Jesus was there, hanging alone, asking where his God was, why he was being forsaken, we know that God was still watching, perhaps brokenhearted over what his son was experiencing. My God, why have you forsaken me? The bystanders that were there thought that he was calling for Elijah, and some of them even went and grabbed a sponge and filled it with sour wine and put it on a stick and gave it to Jesus to drink. And as Jesus cried again with his loud voice and breathed his last, at that moment the temple curtain was ripped from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks were split, the tombs were also open, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. Already, God was beginning to bring about resurrection. God was separating that place where people had been at a distance. Now God was calling people to draw near. And Jesus' disciples, those women who had gone with him, they watched. Jesus was never alone in his crucifixion. His disciples were there, even if at a bit of a distance. Although we may feel forsaken at times in our lives, like Jesus, what we understand is that God is always at work. God's grace is always moving in and around and through the people in our lives, whether near or at a distance. And we're reminded that that sense of being forsaken is not our lot for eternity. That God is always working to bring reconciliation. We get a glimpse of that in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, where we are reminded of our earthly lives. And Paul writes, "But we have this treasure in clay jars, so that it may be made clear that this extraordinary power belongs to God and does not come from us. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed, always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be made visible in our bodies. For while we live, we are always being given up to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus may be made visible in our mortal flesh. So death is at work in us, but life in you." Brothers and sisters, as we experience a sense of forsakenness, a sense of abandonment on this Good Friday, we also look toward our Easter experience, when morning again gilds the skies, when we recognize that God always has the final answer, and that it is in victory. For none of us are forsaken, even if we feel abandoned and alone. God is always with us, bringing about transformation. Thanks be to God. Amen.